Back to the heat. We're talking about the latest developments in France 1 week after the terror attack at the satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo. Joining me now from Paris is Helene Conway-Mouret. She is a senator for French citizens living abroad. Helene, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Charlie Hebdo is back on the streets. Was it a good idea for the newspaper to publish its new edition, again depicting the Prophet Muhammad, given the current tensions in France?
Well, Charlie Hebdo, I think, is just following its own line. It is a satirical weekly paper, and if it hadn't published what it published, what came out today, it would mean that it had changed fundamentally from what it has been for the past few decades. So it was to be expected. Now, of course, one can wonder if indeed it was the right thing to do. But at the same time, I think France is the country of the freedom of expression. We see that millions of people took to the street to march last Sunday, and world leaders came to Paris to show that they were with France on what France defends, and the freedom of expression is one of these values that we cherish and need to continue defending. So if the paper had changed fundamentally and was different, then it would mean that somehow what happened and those who carried out those awful murders had won.
What is the mood like in the country right now, 1 week later? Is there still a sense of shock at what happened?
Yes, of course. I mean, just go back to what happened in the States on September 11th. We had also the same shock. People are still in shock, but I think they were very dignified. I mean, I'm quite happy and proud somehow to see that the French people rallied together in unity, and somehow the march was very dignified. Of course, there are some incidents, you know, that we see some mosques being attacked and so on, but this is the result of some individuals who are probably just taking the opportunity to come out and carry out this vandalism and stupid things. But overall, there's no hate. There's shock, there's anger, and there is a sense that, well, we need to protect ourselves, we need to think, we need to act, to bring people together, and what we call the vivre ensemble, living together, which is also, I think, a fundamental value of the 21st century, needs to be worked on, and we just don't need legislation or more legislation. We maybe need it for security reasons, but I think we need to think of how we, in this multicultural country that we have today, we can bring all the people together. And being a secular country helps that, because being a secular state means that all religions can be present. People can exercise, can practice their faith privately the way they want. And there is this respect for all, but we need to bring it together now, and that there's no minority that feels excluded, and there's no minority that imposes its own rules and values on others.
You say you don't want more legislation. The Associated Press is reporting that the French Prime Minister wants tough new anti-terrorism laws, more monitoring of individuals, and that report says it will lead to a crackdown on liberties in France in exchange for greater security. Is that acceptable to you?
No, that's not what the Prime Minister said. I think, you know, if you go back over his speech yesterday in front of the Parliament, he was very careful to keep this balance of saying that, yes, we need new legislation, tougher legislation to protect French citizens and protect people who live on French territory. But at the same time, he said that we need to be very careful not to bring legislation that will impede on the freedom of people. So I think go back over his speech and you'll see that he was extremely clear on that. And that's why I think he got this standing ovation from all sides of the Parliament and, well, members of Parliament.
Right, you mentioned freedom of expression earlier on. There was an opinion story in the Washington Post a few days ago. It was written by Jonathan Turley, who's a very prominent constitutional law professor here in Washington. And this is what it said. It said, The biggest threat to French free speech isn't terrorism, it's the government. He went on to say, if the French government wants to memorialize those killed at Charlie Hebdo, they could start by rescinding laws criminalizing speech that insults or defames or incites hatred. I guess the point that Professor Turley was making here is that you don't really have freedom of speech in France, do you?
Well, we do, and that's why Charlie Hebdo came out today. And there's another newspaper, in fact, that received threats, very serious threats today, which is called the Canard Enchaîné. So this freedom of speech exists. Now, we do have, of course, the right for people who are offended by cartoons or being a film or whatever to go to court and challenge the right to publish certain things. But the freedom exists, and then, of course, a judge can decide whether indeed a film or a book or a piece of writing needs to be censored. But that freedom exists, and of course there is legislation there to also bring some kind of protection for those who feel that something that has been published went too far. So that freedom does exist.
I just got a few seconds left, Ellen, and I want to get your thoughts on the fact that you had this big rally in Paris on Sunday. There was no prominent American leader present there. What did you make of that?
Well, I think it was unfortunate, of course, but I think it's up to the American people to decide whether indeed it was a rally where they should have been with all of those who turned up. But at the same time, you know, when something like that happens, everybody is in shock. Things go very, very quickly. Now, you know, people are kind of wondering if the president and the prime minister did everything right and go back over some events and whatever. I think one can always reflect and maybe regret that one didn't take the right decision. Of course, the Americans are, you know, very present, and I think John Kerry in particular is extremely present on the international scene, working hand in hand with our own Minister for Foreign Affairs, Laurent Fabius. So I think that, you know, there is no bad feeling here, maybe just regret that indeed there could have been some high-ranking person from the United States, but I think the United States are just proving all the time that they are so present, that you know, we're friends, and there's so much trust and everything between us and the States that apart from regrets, there's nothing else.
Helene Conway-Mouret, thanks for joining us.